Soos beloof gesels ons nou met die woordvoerder van die polisievakbond Popcru oor die Thabo Bester saak. Sy ontsnapping het die wêreld aan die gons en ek dink ons almal slaak 'n sig van verligting nou dat hy en sy vriendin Dr. Nandipha Magudumana in hegtenis geneem is in Tanzanië. En vanoggend saam met ons die woordvoerder Richard Mamabolo wat vir ons help om net bietjie meer sin te maak van wat op die oomblik alles gebeur. Richard, good morning and welcome.
Good morning to you and the viewers.
I want to start here. We now know that 2 more people have been arrested in connection with the Thabo Bester case. They have recaptured Mr. Bester himself as well as Dr. Nandipha. But what is the latest information that you have?
Look, the latest we have is what is already known out there in the public. And of course, we do welcome the fact that there has been an arrest. I think for the past 2 weeks, really, our country was highly embarrassed. And of course, it had obviously as well dealt with the confidence that the public has in the criminal justice system. But most worryingly has been the fact that the victims were obviously, I think it brings relief to the victims of the Mr. Bester. And of course, I think this arrest actually will get us to a point where a lot of questions which should be answered. For example, we know that it is humanly impossible for anybody to escape from that prison. And the fact that they have been arrested recently demonstrates that there should be further investigations looking into people who are involved and actually holding them accountable.
I know that I think you were also quoted saying that it is an embarrassment that the fugitives were captured in Tanzania and not within the South African borders. I do know that Fidelity ADT, I think, also helped or assisted the South African police to actually capture them.
Yeah, no, it's quite embarrassing. The fact that our SAPS has been reactive instead of being proactive, it's something that has been long-standing. And of course, it would then mean that we need to revisit our intelligence services and of course look into how we can do some introspection. But one other aspects that we're quite concerned about has been the fact that just last week you had G4S insisting that Mr. Bester was killed in the fire, and yet you had the Department of Correctional Services saying something different. So it then shows that the contract in which the Department of Correctional Services entered into with the G4S private company and the public-private partnerships was not properly monitored. And that, of course, would have then been the responsibility of the Department of Correctional Services to ensure that there aren't any human rights violations which have been reported in the past years from within that very same institution. So we've got what you call a Correctional Services Act, which gives guidelines around how the relationship should be. So we can equally say that as much as there had been certain questionable deeds within the G4S, the Department of Correctional Services as well has obviously as well been slumbering at this same time.
Richard, sorry, I just want to know, according to you then, what are the biggest loopholes in the system? Why did something like this happen? Did someone just not do their job?
Look, we've got challenges both within the private and the state-owned correctional centers, really. There have been escapes within our correctional centers due to short staffing and overcrowding. But as well, for an incarceration place like G4S, you expect the best of qualities because it is the state-of-the-art facility. And clearly through that, it's quite clear that there had been a lot of people who were involved. There were a lot of monies which were involved. And we still maintain that, as much as this would have happened, it could not have been junior officials really who would have known about this. The fact that there was even a body brought into the prison, brought into a cell at such a high security facility demonstrates that the people who were actually behind this are well connected. That is why we say that the rearrest of Mr. Bester will actually bring about more answers, but definitely a lot of people need to be accountable in this regard.
Taking all of this into consideration, I think a lot of people only recently now with this Thabo Bester case found out that private companies are also being used to help secure or manage or run some of our prisons in the country. A lot of people didn't actually know about that partnership. Taking all of this into consideration, Mr. Mamabolo, do you think that this partnership is viable? Do you think that prisons should be secured by government themselves, or do we continue this partnerships with private companies?
We think that the relationship is not in the best interest of the country because, we don't believe that government can outsource its security apparatus to a foreign-owned company. So it's something that the state should be directly dealing with, since anyway, the core mandate of the Department of Correctional Services is to rehabilitate, while the private prisons' main focus would be around profit maximization. So any wrongdoing that happens therein, they would obviously want to protect it since they've got a contractual agreement which would ensure that they will get as much funds as possible. That we are currently spending over 1 billion rands for the two prisons, and of course, when you look at it, it does not perform the exact role that is mandated to the Department of Correctional Services. And we feel that some of these resources could rather be used to ensure that we improve on the prisons that we have within the country as it stands.
We will continue our focus on the Thabo Bester case in a few minutes, but I do want to ask you, this is the escape that we know about. It is in the spotlight. My concern is how many escapes, and I want to know whether you know, have there been in the past year or two in South African prisons that we perhaps are not aware of?
Well, there are a number of recorded escapes that have been. I think the reason why this one is the main focus is because it's been in the spotlight. But even after Thabo Bester had escaped from the same maximum prison, there has been another recorded escape. But within our normal correctional centers as well, we do have escapes on a regular basis. So it speaks to a lot of challenges around overcrowding, understaffing, the infrastructural integrity. But you see, the difference with our normal prisons and this specific one, which is a private-owned prison, is that it's supposed to be one of the best, one of the most secure prisons in the country. And therefore, for anybody to have escaped from that specific one raises a lot of questions, as opposed to the ones that we have, which of course have got infrastructural defects.
Richard, thank you for your time thus far. I think we're going to continue with the conversation just after the news. Bly gerus by ons ingeskakel om 7:00 het ons vir jou nuus.
Ons het nou ons gesprek met die woordvoerder van die polisievakbond Popcru voort. Ons praat oor die Thabo Bester saak. Saam met ons vanoggend Richard Mamabolo. Thank you so much for continuing this conversation, Richard. My next question to you would be, what is your hope should happen next? How do we get Thabo Bester and Nandipha back into the country?
Thank you. I think we're looking at what has happened with regards to previous cases. You had Pastor Bushiri, who had left the country, and we have struggled to get him back. Recently, there was an announcement that the extradition process of South Africa regarding the Guptas as well has not been successful. So looking at all these things, we think that it was quite important that we had an envoy going to Tanzania to actually look into manners in which they could fast track the process of bringing Mr. Bester and Nandipha back to the country so that they are then held accountable. So I think it's now in the hands of government to look into all those measures. But I hope that in this regard, we do have good working relations. But I think, again, the difference with the two other cases and with this one is that you would have noted that they had reported that their passports were not stamped. So it would have meant that they were in those countries illegally. And hopefully through that process, it would not take further time to actually get them back. One of the things that we think should definitely be looked into is the safety of Mr. Bester, because clearly with this level of escape, it would have meant that he would have received assistance from certain senior people. and him coming back poses a threat to them because ultimately he might reveal information that would implicate a lot of people. So he would obviously have to be brought back into the country, but as well be kept safer and ensure that they do not take him to the same facility.
Yeah, I think some of our viewers might think, what do we mean? It's important to keep this convicted murderer and rapist safe. But as you said, there has to be some high-level officials involved in this escape. And it is important that that network is held accountable and that we find them and that we prosecute them. My question to you then now is, as Popcru, who do you think should be held responsible for this escape?
Look, both the Department of Correctional Services and the G4S management. Remember that when you enter into a private-public partnership, there are certain prescripts which need to be looked into. And of course, the role of the department is to have what you call controllers, who actually oversee the processes as to whether the prison is running in line with the prescripts of the Correctional Services Act. Now, in this instance, it's not the first time that there have been violations of human rights reported within the same prison. Back in 2013, government had to take over from the prison for about 6 months, and it was then handed back to the G4S company again. And even since then, there have been numerous other complaints. So it was the responsibility of the DCS to have known really that there were certain things which were happening, which were out of line. I mean, Mr. Bester escaped last year in May, which is close to a year by now. And up to so far, only until the issue was raised in the media platforms that they then began taking it seriously. What has been happening all along? They should have known way back and should have acted way back then. So we think the blame should fall on both of them. And again, I think there has clearly been a breakdown in relations because just last week, they were contradicting each other, both the G4S and, of course, the Department of Correctional Service. And even the G4S went to an extent where they did not even appear in Parliament. So I think that shows the kind of relationship that the two have.
Would you then say, Richard, you were mentioning now that information came to light months ago about the escape of Thabo Bester. There were reportedly emails sent to high-up officials stating that the body that was found to be burnt in the prison was not that of Thabo Bester. I also heard allegedly some inmates wrote to the president. That letter, of course, never reached him, but wrote to the president to say that you have to come and look what is happening in this prison. Would you say that the police were doing their job in terms of investigating these small details that came out months before social media and the Twitter streets made this public knowledge?
Look, by then it would not have been necessarily the police's role because there were internal investigations. That is why I'm saying that the department is to blame and, of course, D4S. Remember that with these letters as well, as much as they were sent, in fact, to the Deputy Minister of Correctional Centers, it was confirmed that he did receive emails, and yet he did not act on them in accordance with what he was supposed to do. But as well, you also had letters which the G4S company did not process through to the president as well, but as well as the fact that they have not been sharing information with with the Department of Correctional Services. So it then therefore means that the responsibility was not necessarily with the police, but with ensuring that there is monitoring and accountability processes from within both the G4S and the Department of Correctional Services.
Well, what's concerning for me is that we only heard about this now, and as you stated earlier, that this is a high-security prison where something like this is not supposed to be happening. But still it happens, and it happened. So in how many other prisons in the country does this happen, and we don't know about it as public?
Yeah, look, I might not have the actual figures now, but I do know that there have been recorded escapes, especially from our normal correctional centers. But, you know, with the difference with them and this current one, which is a private prison, is that it's a high security level prison, which it's the escape levels are quite it's not easy to escape from that. That is why it's raising eyebrows because, like I indicated, that these other presidents that we normally have got some infrastructural considerations. So it was quite important for us to ensure that we then look into ensuring that the resources, the very same resources that are used for these prisons, are then redirected towards ensuring that we improve the conditions of our normal prisons, of course, which have got challenges around overcrowding and understaffing. That is why we've got a 85% re-offending rate because there is no form of rehabilitation taking place within our correctional centers due to the fact that there's not even enough staff capacity.
Richard, I really want to thank you once again for joining us this morning. My parting shot to you is, as Popcru then, what is your role in monitoring this whole case and making sure that the culprits are brought to book?
Look, we will offer as much support as possible, but I think we've got long-term goals which we are currently engaged with the correctional, with the National Commissioner of the Correctional Services. And of course, this includes ensuring that we have our prisons becoming self-sustainable. We think that the fact that inmates lie idle within correctional centers does not actually augur well for our long-term objective, which is to rehabilitate. We think that there should be means to ensure that all the goods and services that are produced and the food as well is produced by inmates so that at the time when they get released, they at least have skills to sustain themselves. I mean, we just come from a debacle around Bosasa recently where internalization has been a causal factor for the challenges there. So those are some of the things that we're working on getting rid of to ensure that there's self-sustainability.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. That, of course, dit is Richard Mamabolo, die woordvoerder van die polisievakbond Popcru wat vanoggend saam met ons gesels het.